My name is Richard Wallace Drobil. I'm 71 years old. I've lived in Glassboro for about 68 years. And my job is instructional support technician for Camden County College. And that's what they used to call audiovisual. Now it's instructional support. My great-grandparents lived in Bohemia, and my great-grandmother's family are from Wales. They moved there from England. Then they all migrated to the U.S. and were in different locations around the Wissahickon area, Pennsylvania, in Roxborough. My grandmother's side of the family, there was 5 sisters that came over on a boat. Their last name was Adams until they got to the U.S. and married. And my father's family were all in the area around Roxborough, PA, and they worked in the mills, and one was a stationary engineer in Philadelphia and later became an engineer on the Reading Railroad. I was born in Roxborough, Pennsylvania, and so the first home that I lived in was my mother's original home, the family home. And whenever I cried, all the brothers showed up. There was 3 brothers plus my father that lived in the house, and after a year or so, this was too much for him. So he said, we have to move to New Jersey, to the suburbs. So we moved out what would be behind the intermediate school now. I went to the Academy Street School. It's now Rowan's school over there. Since we only had 1 car in the family, a lot of people of that time period in the 50s only had 1 car. So my mother took me everywhere in a stroller. So she would stroll me all the way uptown to pay the electric and gas bills, and took me to kindergarten, which was in the Academy Street School, where I met a lot of my friends that still live in Glassboro or Pittman or the areas around here. And one thing I remember is when I was in early school, President Kennedy was shot, and they pushed the TV, the only TV in the whole school, into the hallway, and all the classes came out to watch the presentation. That was one thing that I clearly remember about my youth in Glassboro. Everything was uptown, so when you wanted to go someplace, you went uptown to the movies, you went uptown to pay your bills, you went down for your supermarket. Everything was up there. There wasn't a college town or any of the stores that we now know on Delsea Drive. And there was hardly any fast food restaurants. Most of the time, everyone ate at home. Glassboro was in a big boom of people moving in from the cities and from the real suburbs, like the farming areas. They were moving up to the Glassboro area. And our home was on Baldwin Road, which was behind the high school, which is the intermediate school now. And they cleared a whole apple orchard to build these homes, these one-level homes, and it was like we were out in sun-baked acres. It was all dirt except for a few trees that were just stuck in the area. I remember walking up the street from the Academy Street School to the Glassboro Theater to see Snow White. The whole class got the afternoon off to walk with the teachers up to the school, and they had a raffle and all this other stuff, and I remember that very clearly because it was a great time to do something like that. I remember when they built College Town. Before College Town was there was a driving range which was owned by Rip Turner, and there was a little restaurant there on the golf course, and it was called the Rip Tea. And if you were small, when you went there, you got like a cherry soda with a little sword in a cherry stuck in it, and that was the greatest thing. And they had a fountain that any loose change your parents had, you wanted to throw in the fountain, and all the money went donated to charity. And I thought that was the greatest thing whenever we went there. Also uptown, there was a place called the Candy Shop, and they got imported candies that were individual candies. They weren't mass produced, and that was a great place to go. Right now, Creams is there. It's a coffee shop. Yes, I remember going to St. Thomas Church. It was a major part of my life. I was either at school or at home or at church. Everything centered around that. It was before internet and all of those kind of media. So if you wanted to be involved with people, you went to church, and there was all kinds of youth organizations going on. My father was superintendent of the church school. And then later on, when I got older, I was the youngest person to sing in the senior choir at church, and I worked my way up through there. That's one thing I remember. I always did that. My family, our house was so close to St. Thomas that we would walk to church every day, every Sunday. Even if it rained, we walked. Most of them were with my church. We would go to Sunday school picnics down at Lake Oberts, which was down Fish Pond Road. Beautiful place with a bathing beach, and I remember that very clearly. The other thing I remember is we had a closed-circuit television system in Glassboro. It was the first one in the area, and I was very impressed by the instructor, Mr. Vale, who got me into interest in photography and videography and all of that. And that was the greatest thing. Me and a bunch of other guys that were in the television club, we took this little truck that was self-contained to different places like Mount Misery down in the Pine Barrens, and that really made an impression on me. I wanted to get into TV and be involved with radio and stuff like that, so I focused my interests that direction. My wife, her name was Janice Stevens, and she grew up in Glassboro, on the other side of town, over beyond the railroad station, over in that area. And we got to know each other through Sunday school. At one time, I was her Sunday school teacher. Anyway, I went away in the service, and she wrote me every single day that I was in the service, and I tried to write back as often as I could. And we just had an arrangement that way that we just kept writing back and forth, and when I came home on leave, we got married, and that was that. We moved out to Mullica Hill into Mullica West. They were apartments that were giving family loans that were reasonable based on your income. And we were the first ones in our unit. So we didn't have a washer, that wasn't installed yet. We didn't have a dryer, all these appliances, and we were on all kinds of lawn furniture where we borrowed from relatives. So we were out there. And then we moved to Lindenwold for a few years because it was halfway between Glassboro, all my church activities, and Lindenwold, and where I worked in Cherry Hill. So we had like a medium point there. And then when my kids came along, we moved back to Glassboro because the school system we believed was better. And her parents, Jan's parents, lived over on Georgetown Road, and it was close to all the schools. And my father was a teacher, father-in-law was a teacher. So after 3 o'clock in the daytime, he was free to go run after my kids from school and do their homework with them and all other things. So yes, our family life was involved with that. I had 2 children. My son is 40 now, and my daughter is 35. And one lives in Missouri and has 2 kids, and the other one's out in Westville. I get to see them time, and she has 2 kids now, so it's getting to be a lot of fun. Yeah, Glassboro was still quite a small town. We had a downtown and we had a main street and all the things that you were looking for in a small town. Plus, there was a growing college influence in Glassboro. A lot of my friends moved on from high school to Rowan University, which then was Glassboro State College. And it was a nice place to grow up because it was rural and there was not a lot of pressure of the city. And we had a good time earlier just going outside and being kids and not, even as young adults, the same thing. We just went outside all the time. Nobody was inside. And you develop friendships that you have for life. I met a lot of my friends when I was in kindergarten at the Academy Street School. A lot of those people, some of them still live in Glassboro, and I'm still good friends with them. And we played in a sandbox all the time. We were either taking a nap or a lesson, or we were outside in the sand along the side of the building. And one guy I still keep up with, he owns the bus stop in Pittman, or he did. And he makes a point of every time he introduces me to somebody that I was in kindergarten with him and playing in the sandbox. It always comes up. There was a lake close to us, Lake Oberst, and we used to all go down there and congregate and fish or swim in the summer, or there was no homes or housing or anything in that area, so everybody went places on their bikes. They didn't have cars, or their parents drive them there. Nowadays, if you're going to an event, your parent takes you and drops you off and picks you up. And when we were growing up, you walked yourself, or you took your bike, and your friends all went with you, and everybody knew you and how you were, what you did. Well, it was very interesting how the center of Glassboro moved from downtown, Main Street and High Street, to the College Town area where all of the stores were, and even a theater was in College Town. And so most people, they didn't go downtown anymore. About the only places downtown that were interesting was the news agency, where a lot of people would congregate and talk, and the bakery on the other end of town, which is now a Nexus property. But when the complete changeover of the community when Rowan came in and they leveled all the houses and things like that, that was kind of depressing, seeing places you had gone all your life, like the flower shop or the theater or the dance studio, and all of a sudden they weren't there anymore. They moved somewhere else, or they just closed. But I think the development now is a lot more interesting and a better use of the space with what's there now on Rowan Boulevard, which I understand was really supposed to be called Glassboro Boulevard, and somehow it got switched around. But yeah, economics in Glassboro were about the same as any rural community like Pittman or Collingswood. There was a upshift of people moving into the area with more technology and abilities to do things that weren't done in the area before. So it sort of switched around from a farming community to a more industrial type location. Most of the leadership roles that I have was inside my church. I was choir director, superintendent of the church school, director of the choir, lay reader and chalice minister and things like that. That was one activity that my whole family was involved in. My mother had jobs in the church, and my father and I did. Although he worked for Burroughs Corporation, he still, on his lunch hours, he was always writing down things that he wanted to do at church. So, and I got involved in that. I sort of followed his lead, and I learned a lot from just being with him and his leadership abilities, and that's how I got a lot of my influence back in those days. Well, he was a very interesting guy. He could have been a teacher, and at one time the pastor of his church volunteered to fund him to go to college after high school, but he didn't want to take on that responsibility. So he more or less read all the time and was involved in going to other churches and doing lay minister work and stuff like that when he wasn't, although he wasn't trained in that, he trained himself. He was interested in science and biology and all this stuff, and by him doing things like that, I got involved, same way following his lead. So he was the biggest influence on my life. My mother taught Sunday school and worked in the church also, and that's where I met my wife at church. It was kind of nowhere to hide. She like chased me all over the place until we finally got married. So that was my big influence. The other was the audiovisual at the high school. I got involved with theater productions and directing and all of that, and I just kept getting more interested in that kind of thing where I was involved with a group doing a project. I was in high school, and that's when I first got a draft card. The draft cards were coming out at the time, and the Vietnam War was happening. And then I spent 1 year in college at Gloucester County College, and then my number came up. And as soon as that comes up, you want to make a move real quick. So I went to the Air Force recruiter, and I was recruited and left almost the next day. My mother was devastated that I went into the service, but I didn't want to go into the Army. So I spent 6 years in the service, and it wasn't that bad. Basic training was terrible. Of course it is, with everybody says that, but then when you get done, it's like a club. You're like, oh yeah, I remember when we did this or we did that. And it's sort of something that pulls everybody together that's been in the military. So I was in a cryptographic systems installation squadron. And I spent 1.5 years in the Pentagon working on the Joint Chiefs of Staff headquarters. And I was also in Cincinnati, Ohio. And the year my crew was out there to do an installation in the Sylvania light bulb plant, who had government contracts, we installed equipment that scrambled prints and other information and sent it to another location, like to a military location, to be used. So anybody that had a contract with the government, we usually went to their facilities and set up scrambling equipment. We did the installation and the service on that. We also did some overseas, but it was like a regular job. I was stationed on a strategic air command base, so whenever the bombers got scrambled, they scrambled us too. So like 1 o'clock in the morning, you get a call, you got to report to the base. So I would do that. And in Rome, New York, in the wintertime, it snowed about 1 foot every night. So if you didn't have a carport or a garage or a dipstick heater for your car, you had a big problem when they scrambled you in a half-hour notice to report to the base. So I was lucky. My roommate had a truck, and he worked in the same squadron. Yeah, it was very stressful because you had a bag packed in case they wanted you to go to some other place immediately, and you had another bag you had packed to go home on leave. And when you were scrambled onto the base, a lot of times, well, what my job was, we took care of the runway lighting and stuff like that. That was part of a crypto systems electronic installation, so I was involved. But it was stressful. But then after a while, it's like stress, you can handle it if you know it's going to be a routine thing. Like it's stress that you're called out, but you know when you get there exactly what your job is and what you're going to do. So it's like having a civilian job, but you're in the military. The only thing is you can't quit a military job and you can't retire right away from a military job, or the things you would do in a civilian job, you can't do that. But it was stressful. But then after a while, it's like stress, you can handle it if you know it's going to be a routine thing. Like, it's stress that you're called out, but you know when you get there exactly what your job is and what you're going to do. So it's like having a civilian job, but you're in the military. The only thing is you can't quit a military job and you can't retire right away from a military job, or the things you would do in a civilian job, you can't do that in the military. Okay. My father was first interested in trains, but he was interested in real trains. Every year he'd plan a vacation, and it always had something to do with going to some place that had something to do with trains, and then something my mother liked thrown in there too. So we went on all the railroads, live steam railroads and historic railroads and everything up and down the East Coast that we could reach. And I was interested in trains, but I was more interested in the model trains and creating villages and doing crafts with my hands versus riding on real steam trains and stuff like that. So it grew on me, and I just kept moving forward. And then Glassboro had such a great train station, and I kept an eye on that. The whole time I lived in Glassboro, I was hoping that it would become something. Started working as quality control in a company in Cherry Hill. And there was two guys that every time they went to lunch, they were talking about their model trains. So I said, oh, that's interesting. I'm interested in model trains. So we got to be like a 4-person club within the company I worked for. And it eventually became the Strasburg Railroad Club, because the guy that was the most interested modeled the Strasburg Railroad, although he lived in Marlton. So I started buying things that I had sold everything off when my kids came, and they moved into one room after the other, and then I didn't have any place for my trains anymore, and I was in a townhouse. So later on, I just started buying everything back. The things I wanted when I was a kid that my parents couldn't afford, I started buying those used things that were like 50 years old, and that's how I got back into that. And I guess my reputation sort of came before me, because people kept asking me about questions about trains, or where to get this fixed or where to get that fixed. And I was always interested in railroads and where they were going and the technology involved, and the telegraph that made it possible for more trains to use the same rails and things like that. The railroad always was ahead of things on technology because it had to be. Refrigerated, self-contained boxcars and stuff like that to move product. So there was all kinds of technology that I was interested in too. I got involved with the depot because somebody reached out to me and said, we need some information about XYZ, have to do with the train station. Could you come to a meeting? And I said, yeah, I can come to a meeting. I was into trains and railroading my entire life. So I went to the meeting, and I was there, and they said, oh, you know a lot. You should be on the commission. So all of a sudden, I was getting a letter from the mayor saying, you've been nominated for this commission. And I said, okay, that's cool. So I went from just being an observer and a consultant to actually being on the commission. And one thing led to the other. So we just followed the process in funding and getting involved there. I met a lot of people from the area, which I either knew as kids, or my kids knew their parents, or then they lived in Glassboro, and they were involved in the commission too. So all these people all of a sudden I had a personal relationship with that I just didn't know before, or that they were interested in this kind of thing. And we followed it through from the time that the borough bought the building all the way to the dedication of it in 2015 and on to where it is now. That was a great thing when the borough bought the depot. I was just overwhelmed when somebody called me and said, the building's been purchased. What do you want to do to help? And I jumped right into that. And I thought it was the greatest thing. It was like, there was other projects like the Methodist Church. They saved some of the Methodist Church, and there was other buildings in town that they saved, and there was research on like Angelo's Diner and all these other historic places. But because the train station was out where it was sort of an entity that nobody paid any attention to. And when it was sold to a group of investors from Rowan, I thought, oh, they're going to turn it into something really great, like a bookstore or a welcome center or coffee shop or something like that, but it never went anyplace. So then I saw a sign on the outside of the building saying that it was for sale and a number to call. So I called the number and said I was interested in buying the property. And I got a tour of the whole inside from the way it was before the commission started refurbishing it. And I thought that was such a wonderful space, and I envisioned things that could happen to it. And even now, when I walk in there, when I'm there myself to do some kind of cleanup or work, I imagine what it would look like with all kinds of people in the waiting room, or baggage in the baggage area, or the station master sitting at the bump out in the front watching up and down the tracks for a particular train that he was expecting, something like that. It just sort of like blows my mind that it's still there and it's refurbished and people can come and see it. And for more people to get involved in projects like that in Glassboro would just be wonderful, especially people that have talents with gardening or different kinds of other interests that they have that they could lend their talents to. I mean, not just the depot, but other buildings in town that are trying to be saved. It would just be wonderful if they could all get on board and say, yeah, we want to do this, not let it become another property for sale. That's the way I look at it anyway. I was very happy to get involved in that project. I still am, and I enjoy working with all the people there and doing the new projects. We have one we try to do every month, some kind of special project at the end of the month. But this one that's coming up for the Civil War is going to be a doozy with 2 whole days with activity going on all the time there.